I was standing in a dust-covered courtyard somewhere in Kuwait when my phone buzzed with an email that made my blood run cold, informing me that my guest house back in Henderson, Nevada had been declared abandoned property by the Sunset Ridge HOA and was scheduled for auction in 30 days. My name is Victor Ortiz, and I had been deployed overseas for 8 months with the Army National Guard. Before leaving, I had made absolutely certain that everything was in order. My main house was occupied by my younger brother Carlos, who was staying there rent-free to keep an eye on things. The guest house, a small 800-square-foot cottage at the back of my property, was intentionally vacant because I used it for visiting family and friends. I had paid all my HOA dues 6 months in advance, set up automatic payments for utilities, and even sent a formal letter to the HOA board notifying them of my deployment and providing Carlos as my point of contact. The email from someone named Deborah Winters, the HOA president, stated that the guest house had been visibly abandoned for over 6 months, and that despite multiple attempts to contact the owner, no response had been received. Therefore, according to some obscure Nevada statute she cited, they were exercising their right to claim the property for unpaid fees and selling it to recover costs. The whole thing was absurd because the guest house wasn't even a separate property. It was on my land, part of my single lot that I owned outright. I immediately called Carlos, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "Victor, hey man, how are you? Everything okay over there?" Carlos sounded relaxed, completely unaware of the storm brewing back home. "Carlos, did you get any mail from the HOA? Any notices or letters about the guest house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The guest house? No, nothing about that. I mean, I get the regular HOA newsletter sometimes, reminding people to keep their lawns trimmed and stuff." "Why? What is going on?" "They are trying to sell it. They claim it is abandoned property," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "What? That is insane. The guest house is literally in our backyard. How can they sell something that is part of your property?" Carlos's voice rose in disbelief. "I do not know, but I need you to go to the HOA office first thing tomorrow morning. Find out what the hell is happening. Get copies of everything they have, every notice they claim they sent, every document, and call my lawyer, Jeff Morrison. His number should be in my desk drawer. Tell him I will call him as soon as I can." "On it, brother. This is crazy. Do not worry, we will fix this." After hanging up, I immediately went to my commanding officer to explain the situation. Captain Reynolds was a reasonable man who had dealt with similar emergencies before. After reviewing the email and understanding that someone was literally trying to steal my property, he expedited emergency leave paperwork. But even with his help, it would take at least a week to process everything and get me on a flight home. That left just 3 weeks before the supposed auction. I spent the next several hours documenting everything. I printed the email, pulled up my bank statements showing paid HOA dues, found my deployment orders, and located the certified letter receipt proving I had notified the HOA of my absence. I sent everything to Jeff Morrison, my attorney, via email and waited anxiously for his response. Jeff called me back within 2 hours, which was impressive given the time difference. "Victor, I read everything you sent. This is either a massive mistake or something far more concerning. Nevada law does allow HOAs to place liens on properties for unpaid dues, but your dues are paid in full. More importantly, a guest house is not a separate property. It is an improvement on your lot, like a shed or a pool. They have no legal standing to sell it separately. So what do we do?" I asked. "First, Carlos is going to the HOA office tomorrow to gather information. I will file an injunction with the Clark County District Court to halt any sale. I will also send a formal cease and desist letter to the HOA board, making it clear that any attempt to sell your property will result in immediate legal action. This Deborah Winters either does not understand property law or is deliberately attempting fraud. Fraud, I repeated. The word hung heavy in the air. You think she is doing this on purpose? I have seen it before, Victor. Some HOA board members get drunk on their little bit of power. Others see an opportunity to make money. If your property is nice, that guest house could be attractive to someone. Maybe she has a buyer lined up, a friend or family member. Maybe there is a kickback involved. I do not know yet, but we will find out. The next day, Carlos went to the HOA office, which was located in a small building near the community clubhouse. He called me afterward, and I could hear the frustration in his voice even through the spotty connection. "You are not going to believe this," Carlos said. "That Deborah lady was the worst. She is like 50, has that short blonde haircut, you know the one. She kept talking down to me like I was an idiot. I asked to see the notices they supposedly sent, and she said they were in the file and I would need to submit a written request to review them. I told her I was your brother and your representative while you are deployed, and she said that did not matter because I was not on the deed. Did you get anything from her? Anything at all?" I recorded the conversation on my phone. I did not tell her, but I figured we might need it. She kept saying the guest house was clearly abandoned and that they had the right to protect property values by removing abandoned structures. I pointed out that the guest house looks fine. I mean, I check on it every week like you asked. The lawn is mowed, there is no damage, it is just vacant. She said that vacancy for more than 90 days constitutes abandonment under the CC and Articles. Did she show you where it says that in the CC and Articles? No. She said I could purchase a copy for $25. I felt my jaw clench. We already have a copy. I got one when I bought the house. It does not say anything like that. Yeah, I figured. This lady is making stuff up. Oh, and get this. When I was leaving, I overheard her on the phone with someone saying it will be perfect for your daughter and we can get it for a fraction of what it is worth. I think she is trying to sell it to a friend, Victor. That was the moment I knew we were not dealing with a simple misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Deborah Winters was attempting to steal my property to benefit someone she knew. The rage I felt was almost overwhelming, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed to think clearly. Jeff filed the injunction that afternoon. He also contacted the Nevada Real Estate Division and filed a complaint against the HOA. Within 48 hours, we had a court date scheduled for the following week. Jeff assured me that the judge would almost certainly grant the injunction, but we needed to be there in person to present our case properly. I was still waiting for my leave to be approved. The Army bureaucracy moved slowly, even in emergencies. Every day that passed felt like an eternity. I checked my email constantly, hoping for updates. Jeff sent me daily reports on what he was doing, and Carlos continued to monitor the property and the HOA's activities. Then things got worse. Carlos called me 4 days before the scheduled court hearing with panic in his voice. "Victor, they came onto the property. The HOA. They brought a contractor and started boarding up the guest house. They put a big sign on it that says condemned property and no trespassing. I told them to leave, and Deborah said they had the right to secure abandoned structures. I called the police, but they said it is a civil matter and they cannot do anything. Did you call Jeff?" "Yes, immediately after the cops left. He is filing an emergency motion with the court. He said what they did might actually be criminal trespassing and vandalism, but we need to get the judge to issue an emergency order to force them to remove the boards and the signs." I felt helpless, thousands of miles away while someone was literally destroying my property. The boards and the condemned sign would not just be an eyesore, but could actually devalue my property if this dragged on. Moreover, it showed that Deborah was doubling down rather than backing off. She was not afraid of the legal threats, which meant either she was incredibly stupid or she believed she had some protection. My leave finally came through the next day. I booked the first flight I could get, which involved a military transport to Germany, a commercial flight to Atlanta, and then on to Las Vegas. The whole journey took nearly 30 hours, and I barely slept. I kept imagining what I would say to Deborah Winters when I finally confronted her. I landed at McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas at 7 in the morning, 2 days before the court hearing. Carlos picked me up, and we drove straight to my house in Henderson. The moment we pulled into the driveway, I could see the guest house behind the main house, and the sight made my stomach turn. The windows were covered with plywood, and a large yellow sign declared it condemned by order of the Sunset Ridge HOA. It looked like a crack house, not the charming little cottage I had spent thousands of dollars renovating just 2 years ago. They did this in broad daylight, Carlos said. Half the neighbors were out watching. Some of them looked uncomfortable, but nobody said anything. Who is on the HOA board besides Deborah? I asked. There are 3 other people. A guy named Tom Fletcher, he is the treasurer. Linda Martinez, she is the secretary. And some older guy, Robert Chen, who I think is just a member. I have seen them around, but Deborah is definitely the one running the show. I walked around to the back of the house to get a closer look at the guest house. The boards were secured with screws, and the condemned sign was professionally printed. Someone had spent money on this. I took photos from every angle, making sure to document everything. Jeff Morrison arrived an hour later. He was a tall man in his early 40s with graying hair and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. We sat in my dining room and went over everything. The emergency motion was granted this morning, Jeff said. The judge ordered the HOA to remove all boards, signs, and any other materials they placed on your property within 24 hours. If they do not comply, they will be held in contempt of court. I have already sent the order to Deborah Winters via email and certified mail. I also hand-delivered it to the HOA office an hour ago. Did you see her? I asked, briefly. She took the envelope, read the first page, and said she would need to consult with the HOA's attorney before doing anything. I informed her that the order was not a request, and that failure to comply would result in legal consequences. She closed the door in my face. So what happens if she does not remove the boards by tomorrow? We go to the sheriff's department and have them enforce the court order. She could be arrested for contempt, but honestly, I think once she realizes this is serious, she will back down. People like her usually fold when they face real consequences. Jeff was wrong. 24 hours passed and nothing changed. The board stayed up, the sign remained. I called Jeff, and he immediately contacted the court. By that evening, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived at my house with a copy of the court order. Carlos and I followed them to the HOA office. Deborah Winters was standing outside the small building, arms crossed, when we arrived. She was exactly as Carlos had described. Mid-50s, short blonde hair in that classic Karen cut, wearing a pastel pink cardigan and white capris. Her face was pinched in a permanent expression of disapproval. Mrs. Winters, I am Deputy Morgan with the Clark County Sheriff's Department. We have a court order requiring you to remove materials placed on Mr. Ortiz's property within the next 2 hours. Do you understand this order? I understand that the court is interfering with the legitimate authority of this homeowners association, Deborah said, her voice dripping with condescension. "That so-called guest house is an abandoned structure and a blight on our community. We have every right to protect property values." "Madam, the court has determined that you do not have the right to board up or condemn property belonging to Mr. Ortiz. If you do not comply with this order, you will be arrested for contempt of court. Do you understand? This is ridiculous. I am not afraid of you or some liberal judge who does not understand community standards. I am protecting the interests of this neighborhood." Deputy Morgan looked at his partner, then back at Deborah. "Madam, I am going to ask you one more time. Will you comply with the court order?" "No. I will not. The HOA board supports my decision, and we are standing our ground." I watched in amazement as Deputy Morgan pulled out his handcuffs. "Mrs. Deborah Winters, you are under arrest for contempt of court. You have the right to remain silent." Deborah's face went from smug superiority to shock in an instant. "You cannot arrest me. I am the HOA president. I am trying to protect this community." "You have the right to an attorney," Deputy Morgan continued, securing the handcuffs. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you." As they led her to the patrol car, Deborah was screaming about her rights and how this was an outrage. Several neighbors had come out of their houses to watch. I recognized a few of them, people I had waved to or exchanged pleasantries with before my deployment. Some looked sympathetic to Deborah, but others seemed relieved, as if they had been waiting for someone to stand up to her. The deputies arranged for the HOA to provide someone with keys to unlock the guest house. Tom Fletcher, the treasurer, showed up 20 minutes later looking terrified. He was a thin, nervous man in his 60s who kept apologizing. "I am so sorry, Mr. Ortiz. I never wanted this to happen." Deborah said it was all legal, that she had consulted with an attorney. "I should have asked more questions. I should have insisted on seeing the legal opinions. I am truly sorry." "Where are the notices you claim you sent me?" I asked. Tom's face flushed. "There were no notices." Deborah said she sent them, but when I asked to see copies for the records, she said they were at her house. "I do not think she ever sent anything. I think she saw that your guest house was empty and decided to push this through. She has a friend, Patricia, whose daughter just got divorced and needed a place to live. I heard them talking about how the guest house would be perfect and how they could get it cheap at auction." "So this was fraud from the beginning," Jeff said, making notes. "I think so. I am resigning from the board tomorrow. I want nothing to do with this." Tom helped arrange for a contractor to remove the boards that same evening. By midnight, the guest house was back to normal, or at least looked normal from the outside. I would need to check for any damage and repair the screw holes, but the nightmare was beginning to end. The court hearing 2 days later was almost anticlimactic. Deborah showed up with an attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit who clearly had not been fully briefed on the case. He tried to argue that the HOA had legitimate concerns about abandoned property, but Judge Patricia Fernandez shut him down quickly. "Counselor, I have reviewed all the documents in this case. Mr. Ortiz paid his HOA dues in full and in advance. He provided written notice of his military deployment. The guest house is not a separate property, but an improvement on his legally owned lot. Your client boarded up his property without notice, without legal authority, and in direct defiance of a court order. I see no legitimate basis for any action taken by the HOA." Deborah's attorney tried to respond, but Judge Fernandez held up her hand. "I am not finished. What concerns me most is the evidence suggesting this was not a good faith mistake, but a deliberate attempt to seize property for personal benefit. Mr. Morrison, have you filed a complaint with law enforcement regarding potential fraud?" "Not yet, Your Honor." We wanted to resolve the immediate crisis first, but we are prepared to do so. I suggest you do that immediately. Mrs. Winters, you are fortunate that Mr. Ortiz has shown restraint. If the facts are as they appear, you could face serious criminal charges. I am granting the injunction permanently. The HOA is prohibited from taking any action regarding Mr. Ortiz's guest house. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Ortiz's attorney fees and damages for the cost of repairs to his property. We will have a hearing on the amount in 30 days. Deborah stood up, her face red. This is an outrage. That property was abandoned. I was protecting the neighborhood. Mrs. Winters, sit down and be quiet or I will hold you in contempt again, Judge Fernandez said coldly. You trespassed on private property, vandalized a structure, and attempted to sell something that was not yours to sell. The fact that you seem to think you had the right to do this is deeply troubling. I am also ordering an investigation into all HOA board actions over the past 2 years. If there are other victims of similar schemes, they deserve justice. After the hearing, Jeff and I filed a formal complaint with the Henderson Police Department. The detective assigned to the case, a veteran investigator named Sarah Thompson, took the matter seriously. She interviewed Carlos, Tom Fletcher, and several neighbors who had witnessed various events. She also subpoenaed the HOA's financial records and email communications. What Detective Thompson discovered was worse than I had imagined. Deborah had attempted this scheme twice before with other properties in the neighborhood. In one case, an elderly man who had gone to stay with his daughter during a medical crisis came home to find his shed had been demolished by the HOA for being structurally unsound. Deborah had arranged for her brother-in-law's construction company to do the demolition and charged the homeowner $3,000 for it. The man, confused and scared, had paid the bill. In another case, a young couple who traveled frequently for work had returned to find their backyard gazebo had been removed because it supposedly violated HOA aesthetic guidelines. The gazebo had been given to the family of one of Deborah's friends. The couple had been too intimidated to fight back and eventually moved away. The investigation revealed that Deborah had been using her position as HOA president to run what was essentially a shakedown operation. She would target properties whose owners were vulnerable, absent, or unlikely to fight back. She would then create violations, impose fines, or in extreme cases like mine, try to seize property. Money from these schemes had been flowing into accounts controlled by Deborah and her friend, Patricia Monroe. The prosecutor's office charged Deborah with multiple counts of fraud, theft, extortion, and abuse of authority. Patricia Monroe was also charged as an accomplice. The case made local news, and suddenly, I was getting calls from reporters wanting to know about the HOA that tried to steal from a deployed soldier. I did not want the attention, but Jeff convinced me that publicity might help expose how vulnerable homeowners were to corrupt HOA boards. I gave one interview to a local television station. I explained what had happened, showed the photos of my boarded-up guest house, and talked about how helpless I felt being overseas while someone tried to steal my property. The story went viral locally, and then got picked up by national military advocacy groups. Within a week, I was being contacted by other service members who had similar experiences with HOAs during deployments. The Nevada state legislature got involved. A representative named Melissa Cordero introduced a bill that would specifically protect deployed military members from HOA actions and impose strict penalties on HOAs that targeted absent homeowners. The bill passed unanimously and became known as the Deployed Service Member Property Protection Act. But my personal battle was not over yet. The criminal case against Deborah moved slowly through the system. Her expensive attorney filed motion after motion, trying to get charges dismissed or reduced. The HOA itself was in chaos, with most of the board resigning and homeowners demanding answers about where their dues had been going. A forensic accountant hired by the new board discovered that Deborah had embezzled over $150,000 from HOA funds over 5 years. She had created fake invoices from her brother-in-law's construction company and other businesses owned by friends and family. The HOA had been paying for work that was never done, supplies that were never delivered, and services that never existed. The homeowners filed a class action lawsuit against Deborah, Patricia, and several other conspirators. I was named as a lead plaintiff because my case was the most egregious and had the most documentation. Jeff expanded his role to represent the entire class. 9 months after I first received that alarming email in Kuwait, Deborah Winters stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty to 15 felony counts including fraud, theft, and extortion. The prosecutor had offered a plea deal: 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10, plus full restitution to all victims. The alternative was going to trial and potentially facing 30 years or more. Deborah took the deal. At the sentencing hearing, I sat in the front row. Judge Fernandez, who had handled the civil case, was also presiding over the criminal sentencing. Deborah's attorney gave a long speech about how she had gotten caught up in things, how she never meant for it to go this far, how she was sorry. Then Deborah herself spoke. "I want to apologize to Mr. Ortiz and the other homeowners I hurt. I let power go to my head. I thought I was helping the community, but I know now that I was wrong. I am deeply sorry." The words sounded hollow and rehearsed. I did not believe she was truly sorry, only sorry she had been caught. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood up. "Your Honor, I was deployed overseas, serving my country, trusting that the laws and systems in place would protect my property and my rights. Instead, Mrs. Winters saw my absence as an opportunity to steal from me. She did not care that I was a soldier. She did not care that what she was doing was illegal. She only cared about making money and helping her friends. I am fortunate that I had the resources to fight back, but many people do not. Many people would have lost their property, paid illegal fines, or been bullied into submission. Mrs. Winters abused her authority in the worst possible way, and I believe she deserves the maximum punishment allowed by law." Judge Fernandez nodded and then delivered her sentence. 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole before serving 10 years. Full restitution of $230,000 to all victims, including the homeowners association itself. Permanent prohibition from serving on any HOA board or managing any community association. Patricia Monroe received 5 years for her role as an accomplice. Several other co-conspirators pleaded guilty to lesser charges and received probation, fines, and community service. The civil lawsuit resulted in additional judgments against Deborah and Patricia. My attorney fees, which had reached nearly $40,000, were fully covered. I received an additional $50,000 in damages for emotional distress, the devaluation of my property during the time it was boarded up, and punitive damages. The money did not erase what had happened, but it helped. The Sunset Ridge HOA underwent a complete transformation. New board members were elected, all of them committed to transparency and following the law. They hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations and implemented strict oversight procedures. The dues were reduced because so much of the previous budget had been going into Deborah's pocket or to her fraudulent schemes. My brother Carlos, who had lived through the whole nightmare with me, decided to stay in Nevada. He found a job he loved and eventually bought his own house a few miles away. We remained close, meeting for dinner every week and talking about everything except HOA drama. I returned to work at my civilian job as an electrician and continued my service with the National Guard. The guest house became a rental property, providing some additional income and ensuring it would never sit vacant again. I had learned that an empty property could be seen as an opportunity by unscrupulous people, and I was not going to take that risk again. The media attention eventually faded, but I still got occasional calls from reporters doing stories about HOA abuse or from service members facing similar situations. I always tried to help, sharing my experience and connecting them with resources. Jeff Morrison became something of a specialist in HOA law, representing other homeowners who were fighting corrupt boards. One afternoon, about a year after everything had been resolved, I was working on some electrical repairs in the guest house when a car pulled up. A young woman got out, probably in her late 20s, and walked over hesitantly. "Are you Victor Ortiz?" she asked. "I am. Can I help you?" "My name is Amanda Fletcher. Tom Fletcher is my father. He was on the HOA board when everything happened with Deborah Winters." I remember Tom. He seemed like a good guy who got caught up in something bad. He was. He had no idea what Deborah was doing. When he found out, he was devastated. He blamed himself for not asking more questions, for not standing up to her sooner. "What can I do for you, Amanda?" She took a deep breath. "My dad passed away 2 months ago. Heart attack. But before he died, he told me about what happened with you and how guilty he felt. He wanted to make sure people knew the truth about what Deborah did. He kept detailed notes, records of conversations, everything. I found them in his papers after he passed. I thought you should have them, in case they could help anyone else who is dealing with something similar." She handed me a thick envelope. Inside were handwritten notes, photocopies of emails, meeting minutes, and financial documents. It was a roadmap of Deborah's schemes, documenting things even Detective Thompson had not uncovered. "Thank you, Amanda. This means a lot. Your dad did the right thing in the end. He helped expose what was happening and cooperated with the investigation. That took courage. He said you were the real hero, standing up to her even from overseas. He said if you had not fought back, Deborah would still be doing this to people. So thank you, Mr. Ortiz." After Amanda left, I sat in the guest house and looked through the documents. Tom had been meticulous, recording dates, times, and conversations. It was clear he had been troubled by Deborah's actions for months, but had not known what to do about it. In the end, he had done the right thing, and these documents might help other victims we did not even know about yet. I called Jeff Morrison and told him about the new documents. He came by that evening to review them, and his eyes lit up as he read through the pages. "Victor, this is incredible. There are references here to other properties in other HOAs. It looks like Deborah was consulting with HOA presidents in neighboring communities, teaching them her schemes. This could lead to more investigations, more prosecutions. This is a gold mine." "Tom Fletcher carried this guilt with him until he died," I said. "The least we can do is make sure his documentation helps people." Jeff took the documents and promised to turn them over to the appropriate authorities. Within weeks, new investigations were launched into HOAs in 3 neighboring communities. 2 more board presidents were eventually charged with crimes similar to what Deborah had done. The ripple effects of one corrupt HOA president had spread far and wide, but finally, the accountability was spreading even further. On the 2-year anniversary of receiving that first alarming email, I threw a barbecue at my house. Carlos came, along with Jeff Morrison and his wife, Detective Sarah Thompson, some of my neighbors from the new and improved HOA board, and a few buddies from my National Guard unit. We grilled burgers and steaks, drank beer, and celebrated not just my victory but the changes that had come from it. As the sun set over Henderson, I stood on my back patio looking at the guest house. It looked perfect, just as I had always envisioned it. The little cottage had become a symbol of something important to me. The idea that standing up to corruption and abuse of power mattered, even when it seemed impossible. My neighbor Mike Anderson, one of the new board members, came over and clinked his beer bottle against mine. "You know, before all this happened with you, I thought HOAs were just annoying but harmless. I had no idea how much power they had or how badly that power could be abused. You opened everyone's eyes, man." "I did not set out to be some kind of activist," I said. "I just wanted to protect my property." "Yeah, but you could have just taken the settlement and moved on. Instead, you pushed for criminal charges, cooperated with the investigations, talked to the media. You made sure this was not just about you. That matters." Mike was right, though I had not really thought about it that way. I had been focused on justice, on making sure Deborah Winters faced consequences for what she had done. But in the process, something bigger had happened. Laws had changed. People had become aware. Other victims had come forward. The last guest to leave that evening was Jeff Morrison. As he was heading to his car, he turned back to me. "You know what the best part of this whole case was, Victor? It was not the money we won or the jail time Deborah got. It was the fact that we proved the system can work. When corruption happens, when people abuse power, it is possible to fight back and win. That is a lesson a lot of people needed to learn." "I just wish I had not had to learn it the hard way," I said. "The best lessons usually are the hard ones. Take care of yourself, Victor. And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." After everyone had gone and I was cleaning up the remnants of the barbecue, I thought about how much had changed in 2 years. I had left for a routine deployment thinking everything at home was secure and under control. I had been wrong. But in being wrong, in having to fight an unexpected battle, I had discovered something about myself. I was not the kind of person who would back down when facing injustice, even when it would have been easier to just give up and move on. The guest house stood quiet in the evening light, its windows reflecting the last rays of the sun. It was just a building, 800 square feet of wood and drywall and shingles, but it represented something more now. It was proof that ordinary people could stand up to corruption and win. It was a reminder that laws mattered, that justice was possible, that doing the right thing had value even when it was difficult. I locked up the main house and walked over to the guest house, using my key to open the door. Inside, everything was neat and clean. My current tenant, a young teacher named Rachel, kept the place immaculate. I had told her the whole story when she moved in, and she had been fascinated. She said it made her feel safe knowing her landlord was someone who would fight for what was right. Standing in the guest house, I remembered that moment in Kuwait when I had first read Deborah's email. I remembered the fear, the anger, the helplessness. I remembered thinking that I might lose everything I had worked for because of one corrupt person abusing their tiny bit of power. But I had not lost. I had fought back and I had won. The legal bills had been substantial, even with the reimbursement. The stress had taken a toll on my health and my relationships. The whole experience had been a nightmare I would not wish on anyone. But standing there in the guest house, knowing that Deborah Winters was in prison, knowing that laws had been changed to protect other people, knowing that I had made a difference, I felt something like peace. My phone buzzed with a text from Carlos. "Great party tonight, bro. Proud of you." "Always have been," but even more now. I texted back a quick thank you and headed back to the main house. Tomorrow I had work, regular ordinary work doing electrical installations and repairs. I had a guard drill coming up next weekend. Life had returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal that included being known as that guy who took down the HOA president. As I got ready for bed, I thought about all the people who had helped me through this ordeal. Carlos, who had been my eyes and ears while I was overseas. Jeff Morrison, who had believed in my case and fought tirelessly. Detective Thompson, who had dug deep to uncover the full extent of Deborah's crimes. Judge Fernandez, who had seen through the nonsense and ruled based on law and justice. Tom Fletcher, who had found his courage in the end and left behind evidence that helped others. I had been lucky, I realized. Lucky to have resources, lucky to have a good attorney, lucky to have family support. Many people facing similar situations did not have those advantages. They got steamrolled by corrupt HOA boards, lost their properties, paid illegal fees, and had no recourse. The changes that had come from my case would help some of those people, but I knew there were countless others still suffering under petty tyrants like Deborah. The next morning I was drinking coffee on my patio when I saw movement at the house next door. A moving truck was parked in the driveway, and a family was unloading boxes. New neighbors. I walked over to introduce myself. A couple in their 30s were directing the movers, and two young kids were playing in the front yard. The man saw me approaching and smiled. "Hi there. I am Dave Patterson, and this is my wife, Emily. We are just moving in. Victor Ortiz, I live next door. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks. We are excited to be here. We have been looking for a place in a good neighborhood with reasonable HOA fees. The previous owner said the HOA here is pretty reasonable, not like some of the horror stories you hear." I smiled. "Yeah, the HOA here is good now. We had some issues a couple years back, but they got resolved. The current board is solid, and they actually follow the law." "That is good to hear. I was worried because Emily's sister lives in California and her HOA is a nightmare. Fines for everything, constant rule changes, really aggressive board members. We wanted to make sure we were not getting into something like that." "You will be fine here," I assured him. "But if you ever do have any issues with the HOA or anything else, feel free to come talk to me. I have some experience dealing with these things." After chatting with Dave and Emily for a few more minutes, I headed back to my house. It felt good to welcome new neighbors and to know that the community was in a better place than it had been 2 years ago. The Sunset Ridge HOA would never be perfect. No organization run by volunteers ever was, but at least now there was accountability and transparency. Later that week, I attended an HOA board meeting. I tried to go to most of them now, just to stay informed and to make sure things were running properly. The meetings were boring, mostly discussions about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance, but that was fine. Boring was good. Boring meant no drama, no corruption, no schemes. At the end of the meeting, the current president, a retired accountant named George Webb, asked if anyone had any new business to discuss. An older woman in the back raised her hand. "Yes, I just want to say that I appreciate how this board operates. I have lived in this neighborhood for 12 years, and the last 2 years have been the best. You all are doing a great job, and I wanted you to know that people notice and appreciate it." Several other homeowners nodded in agreement. George smiled and thanked her. After the meeting, he came over to me. "You know, Victor, that woman had been here during Deborah's entire reign. She told me once that she had been terrified of the HOA, that she avoided doing anything that might attract attention because she was scared of being fined or targeted. Now she feels safe in her own home. That is what good governance looks like. You all have done a great job turning things around, I said. We learned from your example. You showed us that standing up to corruption matters and that homeowners have rights. We are just trying to live up to that standard. Driving home that night, I reflected on how one incident had changed so many lives. Deborah was in prison. Her accomplices had faced consequences. Laws had been changed, and an entire community had been transformed. All because I had refused to accept an injustice and had been willing to fight for what was right. The following month, I was invited to speak at a conference in Las Vegas about HOA reform. Attorneys, legislators, and homeowner advocates from across the country were gathering to discuss how to prevent abuse and protect property owners. I was nervous about public speaking, but Jeff convinced me that my story needed to be heard. Standing at the podium in front of 200 people, I told my story. I talked about being overseas and receiving that email. I described the fear and frustration of trying to fight back from thousands of miles away. I explained how the investigation had revealed a pattern of corruption and how criminal charges and civil lawsuits had brought justice. And I emphasized that this could happen to anyone, that HOA boards had tremendous power and minimal oversight, and that protecting homeowners required vigilance and accountability. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. During the question and answer session, several people shared their own horror stories about HOA abuse. A woman from Arizona talked about being fined thousands of dollars for having the wrong color mailbox. A man from Florida described how his HOA had placed a lien on his house for failing to remove holiday decorations fast enough. A veteran from Colorado talked about facing foreclosure over disputed HOA dues while he was deployed in Afghanistan. The stories were heartbreaking and infuriating. I realized that what had happened to me was not unique. It was happening all over the country, to thousands of people, every single day. The difference was that most of those people did not have the resources or the knowledge to fight back effectively. After the conference, several attorneys approached me about starting a nonprofit organization to help homeowners fight abusive HOAs. The idea was to provide legal assistance, resources, and support to people who could not afford expensive lawyers like Jeff Morrison. I was intrigued but also overwhelmed. I was not a lawyer or an activist. I was just an electrician who had been forced to defend his property. But the more I thought about it, the more the idea appealed to me. I had been fortunate to have help when I needed it. Other people were not so lucky. If I could use my experience to help others, maybe that would give meaning to everything I had gone through. I talked to Carlos about it over dinner a few nights later. He was immediately supportive. "You should do it, Victor. You are good at this. You understand what people are going through because you lived it. And you are not doing it alone. There are lawyers and advocates who want to help. You would just be the face of it, the person who connects homeowners to resources." I do not know if I have time. I have my job, the guard, and I am still dealing with the rental property. You will make time for things that matter. This matters, Victor. You know it does. He was right. A month later, I helped launch the Homeowner Defense Network, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping people fight abusive HOAs. Jeff Morrison served as the legal director, and several other attorneys volunteered their time. We created a website with resources, sample letters, and guides to understanding HOA law. We set up a hotline for people to call when they needed help. The response was overwhelming. Within the first week, we received over 500 calls and emails from homeowners across the country facing HOA problems. We could not help everyone, but we tried to provide guidance and connect people with local attorneys who could assist them. We also started documenting cases of abuse, building a database that could be used to push for legislative reforms. Running the nonprofit became a second job, but it was fulfilling in a way my regular work was not. Every time we helped someone successfully fight back against an abusive HOA, I felt like the nightmare I had gone through had been worth it. Every time a corrupt board member faced consequences, I felt like justice was being served not just for me, but for everyone who had been victimized. 3 years after that first email in Kuwait, I received a letter from Deborah Winters. It had been forwarded through the prosecutor's office, and I almost threw it away without reading it. But curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten on prison stationery. In it, Deborah claimed she had found religion and was seeking forgiveness from those she had wronged. She wrote that she had been blinded by greed and ego, that she had justified her actions by telling herself she was helping the community, but she knew now that she had been wrong. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her so she could apologize in person. I showed the letter to Jeff, who advised caution. She might be sincere, or she might be looking for something. Maybe she thinks if you forgive her it will help with her parole hearing down the line. You do not owe her anything, Victor. I thought about it for a week before deciding to respond. I wrote back declining the meeting but wishing her well on her path to redemption. I explained that while I hoped she had genuinely changed, I had no desire to revisit that painful chapter of my life. I encouraged her to make amends through her actions, by living honestly and ethically going forward, rather than seeking absolution from those she had harmed. I never heard from her again, and I was fine with that. Forgiveness was complicated, and I was not sure I would ever fully forgive what she had tried to do. But I could move forward with my life, and that was enough. The Homeowner Defense Network continued to grow. We helped hundreds of homeowners fight back against abusive HOAs, and we started seeing results. More states passed laws protecting homeowners from aggressive collection practices and limiting the power of HOA boards. More attorneys specialized in HOA law, providing representation to people who needed it. More homeowners became aware of their rights and willing to stand up for themselves. Looking back on everything that had happened, I sometimes wondered what would have occurred if I had not fought back. Deborah would have sold my guest house to her friend's daughter. I would have lost a significant portion of my property value, and Deborah would have continued her schemes, victimizing more and more people. One person's decision to fight injustice had changed dozens of lives and reformed an entire system. On the 5th anniversary of that email in Kuwait, I hosted another barbecue. This time the guest list included not just friends and family, but people I had met through the Homeowner Defense Network. There was Maria from Texas, who had successfully fought off foreclosure after her HOA claimed she owed dues she had already paid. There was Robert from Oregon, who had stopped his HOA from demolishing his workshop without notice. There was Jennifer from Virginia, who had exposed embezzlement by her HOA treasurer and gotten him arrested. As I looked around at all these people, survivors and fighters who had refused to be victims, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. What had started as a personal nightmare had become something larger and more meaningful. It had become a movement, a network of people supporting each other and demanding accountability from those in power. Carlos pulled me aside during the party. I have been thinking about that day when you called me from Kuwait, freaking out about the email from Deborah. Do you remember what I said? You said you would handle it and not to worry. Right. I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought maybe it was a paperwork error or a misunderstanding. I never imagined it would lead to arrests, investigations, new laws, and you starting a nonprofit. Life is strange. It really is, I agreed. but I would not change any of it now. Well, maybe I would change the part where I had to spend $40,000 on legal fees. Carlos laughed. But you got that back, plus damages. And honestly, you have probably helped people save millions of dollars by stopping corrupt HOAs, so it was worth it. As the sun set on another beautiful Nevada evening, I walked through my property, past the main house and over to the guest house. My tenant Rachel had moved out a few months earlier, and I had decided not to rent it out again. Instead, I was using it as an office for the Homeowner Defense Network. The little cottage that had almost been stolen from me was now the headquarters for an organization helping others fight similar injustices. There was a poetic symmetry to that. Inside the guest house, I had set up a desk, filing cabinets, and a wall covered with thank you letters from people we had helped. Every letter represented someone who had stood up to corruption, someone who had refused to be a victim. Every letter was a reminder of why this work mattered. I sat down at the desk and opened my laptop to check emails. There were 17 new requests for help. A woman in Michigan facing foreclosure over a disputed fine. A man in Tennessee whose HOA was trying to force him to remove solar panels. A couple in Nevada whose HOA board was embezzling funds. I started reading through them, taking notes and figuring out which cases we could help with and which ones we would need to refer elsewhere. This was my life now, at least part of it. I still worked as an electrician. I still served in the National Guard. But I also fought for people who could not fight for themselves. I used my experience and my platform to shine a light on corruption and abuse. And slowly, case by case, we were making a difference. My phone rang, interrupting my work. It was Jeff Morrison. "Hey, Victor, just wanted to give you a heads up. Remember that investigation into the HOA in Spring Valley that we referred to the authorities? The one where the president was forcing homeowners to use her son's landscaping company. That is the one. They just arrested her. 5 counts of extortion and conspiracy to commit fraud. It is all over the local news. That is great. How many victims? At least 20 families. Probably more once word gets out and others come forward. This would not have happened without your organization flagging the pattern and getting the evidence to the right people." After hanging up with Jeff, I allowed myself a moment of satisfaction. Another corrupt HOA board member was facing justice. Another group of homeowners would be protected. The system was working, slowly but surely. As I was closing up the guest house for the night, I paused to look around one more time. This little 800-square-foot building had been at the center of a storm that had changed my life and the lives of countless others. It was just a structure, wood and nails and drywall. But it represented something important, the idea that property rights mattered, that corruption should be punished, and that ordinary people could fight back against injustice and win. I locked the door and walked back to the main house, where the sounds of the party were starting to wind down. Tomorrow, I would be back to my regular life, wiring houses and preparing for drill weekend. But tonight I could reflect on how far I had come from that moment in Kuwait when I thought I was going to lose everything. The guest house stood quiet and secure behind me, a monument to persistence, justice, and the power of refusing to back down. It was mine, legally and rightfully, and no one would ever take it from me again.